The galaxy thought humanity was weak because Earth had no visible fleet. But humans are most dangerous when they are silent, prepared, and underestimated.
The first thing the Serrak lost was not a ship, a weapon, or a soldier. It was certainty. At 3:17 Tribunal time, the invasion fleet crossed the edge of the Harrow Line with 912 war vessels, 6 occupation carriers, and enough orbital firepower to erase every human colony between Mars and the outer dark. Supreme Marshal Ver Karan announced the crossing on an open channel because the Serrak Ascendancy believed fear worked best when delivered publicly. 47 civilizations watched the broadcast. Some watched in horror. Some watched in relief that the target was not them. Most watched in silence, because silence had kept weaker worlds alive for centuries. In the center of the Galactic Tribunal, Ambassador Mara Ellison stood alone beneath the white judgment lights while the Serrak proclamation echoed through the chamber. Humanity will be absorbed without resistance. The words were translated into every registered language, but they did not become less ugly in any of them. Around Mara, alien delegates shifted, whispered, and glanced toward the defense index glowing beside Earth's name. Minor defensive species. Limited expeditionary range. No confirmed capital fleet near the Harrow Line. No strategic deterrent recognized by treaty law. One delegate actually pitted her. Another looked away. Mara did neither. She watched the enormous projection of the Serrak fleet sliding toward human space, and for the first time since the emergency session began, she smiled. It was small. Almost polite. That was when the chamber became uneasy. The tribunal chair leaned forward. Ambassador Ellison, does Earth intend to respond? Mara looked from the fleet display to the gathered powers of the galaxy, all of them waiting for panic, apology, or surrender. Instead, she asked one question. Did they check the moons? No one answered at first. On the broadcast, Supreme Marshal Karan laughed. The sound carried across the chamber through the live feed, cold and certain and full of conquest. Earth has hidden no fleets there, he said. Only dead rock, failed mines, and abandoned machines. Mara's smile faded, but not from fear. From memory. Then they did not check the moons, she said. 3 seconds later, the Serrak advance scouts disappeared. Not destroyed. Not jammed. Not damaged. Gone. The fleet continued forward, but its perfect formation tightened for the first time. In the tribunal chamber, every display operator began pulling new data, and every alien delegate suddenly understood that humanity had not sent warships to stop the invasion. Humanity had sent something decades earlier. Something patient. Something buried. And the Serrak fleet had just stepped on it.
The Serrak entered the Harrow Line believing Earth was defenseless, but Mara's allegiance question changed everything. Did they check the moons? Now the Scots are gone and the galaxy realizes human prepared something long before the invasion began.
For 11 seconds after the scouts vanished, the Serrak fleet did nothing. That was the first mistake. Every civilization watching the broadcast understood the weight of those 11 seconds differently. To the smaller worlds, it looked like hesitation. To the older powers, it looked like calculation. To the Serrak, it was something far more unsettling because their war doctrine did not include a word for confusion during forward conquest. Their doctrine had words for resistance, casualty, counterforce, delay, and extermination, but nothing clean for the moment when a superior fleet entered empty space and found that empty space had answered back. Supreme Marshal Ver Karan stood on the command terrace of the Serrak flagship, surrounded by living maps that hovered in layered rings around his throne platform. His officers did not speak unless summoned. They did not need to. The Ascendancy had conquered half a spiral arm by reducing war to sequence. First came terror. Then isolation. Then precision strikes against infrastructure. Then surrender, occupation, and historical correction. Entire species had learned to fear Serrak order more than Serrak weapons because the weapons merely ended battles. The order ended futures. But the Harrow Line was not behaving like a battlefield. It was behaving like a memory. The missing scouts had been only 6 vessels, light reconnaissance craft sent ahead to confirm what Serrak intelligence already knew. The corridor contained abandoned human industrial sites from the early expansion era, most of them registered as mining failures, repair depots, pressure shelters, or navigation buoys. The files described rusted machines, empty tunnels, frozen airlocks, and automated systems too outdated to threaten anything larger than a cargo shuttle. Karan had reviewed the summaries himself, not because he respected Earth, but because contempt was more useful when informed. Humanity had built everywhere, failed often, documented obsessively, and left behind enough useless debris to make clean invasion inconvenient. "Recover the scouts," Karan ordered. His voice moved through the flagship's command system and returned multiplied across the fleet. Search vessels adjusted course. Carrier drones unfolded from their bays. Sensor arrays widened in disciplined pulses. The Serrak did not panic. Panic belonged to species that believed events could escape them. In the Galactic Tribunal, Ambassador Mara Ellison watched the same data appear on the shared display with a stillness that irritated almost everyone in the chamber. The tribunal chair, an ancient Lethari whose translucent skin showed the slow movement of inner light, turned toward her with visible restraint. "Ambassador, if Earth has placed active military systems inside the Harrow Line, you are required under interstellar disclosure law to identify their classification." Mara looked at the chair as though the question had arrived exactly when expected. "Earth has disclosed every active military system placed inside recognized coalition space." "That is not an answer. It is a precise answer." A restless murmur moved through the delegates. Across the crescent benches, representatives who had dismissed humanity minutes earlier now began searching treaty clauses, historical filings, and old industrial permits with the panicked aggression of bureaucrats realizing that the danger might already have been legally approved. The defense index beside Earth's name still glowed in soft blue letters. Minor defensive species. Limited expeditionary range. No confirmed capital fleet. The words had looked comforting before. Now they looked lazy. A junior analyst from the Valorian Combine was the first to notice the pattern. His name was Rel-Lin Se, and until that morning, his greatest professional accomplishment had been correcting a translation error in a trade dispute about algae exports. He had been assigned to the emergency session because senior analysts were occupied with Serrak movement projections, which meant no one stopped him from pulling files that everyone important considered irrelevant. He opened the Harrow Line Industrial Registry, overlaid human construction records from 73 years of expansion, and began removing sites that had failed for ordinary reasons. Then he removed the sites that were close to known resources. Then the sites built near stable transit routes. Then the ones whose placement made economic sense. What remained on his screen made his hands go cold. Hundreds of human structures were scattered across the dead corridor with no apparent military symmetry, no obvious command nexus, no central shield geometry, and no weapons concentration. To an invasion planner, they looked random. To a colonization office, they looked inefficient. But to someone studying movement, pressure, and gravitational narrowing, they formed something else. Not a wall. Not a minefield. A set of choices. Rel-Lin magnified the projection until the Harrow Line filled half his station. Each moon, depot, and failed platform sat near a place where a large fleet would naturally adjust formation. Each abandoned mining shaft overlooked a blind angle in deep field scanning. Each rescue beacon rested just beyond the safest turning radius of a capital vessel. None of them forced a path alone. Together, they suggested one. He raised his hand, then lowered it because junior analysts did not interrupt live tribunal sessions. Then the Serrak lost another ship. This one was not a scout. It was a support cruiser moving at the left edge of the third formation ring, a vessel designed to carry replacement shield nodes and field repair swarms. The cruiser did not explode. Its engines simply changed direction for half a second, enough to pull the ship out of alignment and into the wake turbulence of the vessel ahead of it. The collision was minor by Serrak standards, but the correction forced 3 nearby ships to spread wider. That widening pushed the outer ring closer to a dead mining moon whose surface had been dark for 60 years. The moon woke up. Not with light. Not with fire. With gravity. A pulse rolled outward from beneath its fractured crust, too subtle to qualify as an attack, too brief to trigger standard defense law, but strong enough to bend the local sensor field by a fraction of a degree. On the Serrak flagship, 900 tactical screens corrected themselves at once. Every correction was mathematically reasonable. Every correction was wrong. Coran's primary navigation officer stiffened. Marshal, formation drift has increased. Source: unclear. Possibly local mass instability. Dead moons do not become unstable on command. The officer did not answer because the statement was true, and truth had no immediate use when the map was lying. In the tribunal chamber, Rel-Lin finally stood. His voice cracked on the first word, which would later embarrass him deeply, but no one laughed because the main display had begun showing the same thing he had found. "They are not weapons," he said. The chair turned sharply. "Explain." Rel-Lin swallowed and sent his overlay to the central projection. The Harrow Line changed before the eyes of the tribunal. What had looked like junk became placement. What had looked like failed industry became pressure architecture. What had looked like human poverty became patience measured in orbits, materials, and silence. "They are environmental controls," Rel-Lin said, finding confidence as fear made his thoughts clean. "Not in the civilian sense. Not exactly. Each site adjusts conditions around it. Sensor distortion, microgravity correction, debris positioning, emergency beacon priority, navigational preference. Alone, every adjustment is too small to matter. Together." He stopped. Mara finished for him, very quietly. "Together, they teach an enemy where to go." The chamber went silent enough that the Serrak broadcast became audible again. Coran was issuing orders faster now, not panicked, but no longer ceremonial. Search drones were being deployed. Rear formations were tightening. Long-range weapons were warming without targets. The fleet still looked immense, still terrifying, still capable of burning worlds, but something had changed in how the galaxy watched it. Before, the Serrak fleet had seemed like a blade pointed at Earth. Now it looked like a blade entering a machine. Coran ordered the first abandoned platform destroyed. A heavy destroyer fired at a derelict repair station drifting beside a shattered asteroid belt. The station broke apart in an unspectacular cloud of metal, ice, and old human warning paint. For one breath, the Serrak regained confidence. Then the fragments spread in perfect silence, catching starlight as they moved into the path of the destroyer's own sensor sweep. The tactical system identified the debris, corrected for it, and rerouted 3 nearby ships around a false collision risk. That reroute placed them closer to the second moon. The second moon did not wake up. It was already awake. The Serrak ships never saw the shift because it looked like their own caution. That was the elegance of it. The Harrow Line did not push them with obvious force. It offered safer choices until safety became a corridor with walls no Serrak officer could see. In the tribunal, several delegates were now openly staring at Mara as if she had changed species in front of them. She felt their fear, their suspicion, their dawning respect, and the old familiar bitterness beneath it all. They had read human openness as simplicity. They had mistaken full disclosure for full understanding. Earth had submitted thousands of infrastructure filings across 7 decades, each one approved by board committees that cared only whether the objects carried banned warheads or active shield breakers. No one had asked why rescue stations needed deep core stabilizers. No one had asked why failed mining colonies maintained power reserves after evacuation. No one had asked why human engineers built backup systems for backup systems in places no profitable empire would bother to keep. No one had asked because no one had believed humanity important enough to hide a question inside paperwork. The Serrak fleet advanced another 1,000,000 kilometers into the Harrow Line. Behind them, 3 navigation buoys changed status from inactive to emergency guidance mode. Their signals were old, legal, and distress-coded, which meant Serrak systems automatically deprioritized them as non-combatant infrastructure. The buoys did not jam communications. They did not block retreat. They merely reported that several routes behind the fleet were unsafe due to debris expansion from the destroyed repair station. The reports were technically true. That made them worse.
A Serrak rear captain requested permission to widen the withdrawal lane. Coran denied it before the request fully rendered. Withdrawal language had no place in an invasion order. He commanded the rear formation to maintain forward pressure and ordered all vessels to stop reacting to civilian signals. For the first time, one of his officers hesitated. It lasted less than a second, but on the tribunal feed, it was visible. Mara saw it. Relin saw it. Half the galaxy saw it without understanding why it mattered. Serrak conquest depended on perfect obedience flowing through perfect certainty. Humanity had not attacked that certainty head-on. Humanity had placed tiny doubts in the path of procedure and waited for the Serrak to obey themselves into danger. The fleet moved deeper. The safe routes narrowed. The dead moons continued to watch without lights, without voices, without mercy. Then the Serrak flagship received a recovery signal from one of the missing scouts. It came from ahead of the fleet, far beyond where any scout should have been able to travel. The signal was weak, distorted, and repeating only 3 words in Serrak command code. Path is clear. Karan stared at the message. In the tribunal chamber, Mara closed her eyes for one brief moment, and when she opened them again, the last trace of softness had left her face. Because the Harrow Line had stopped guiding the invasion away from Earth. It had begun inviting it forward. The invitation should have been impossible. Serrak command code could not be forged by foreign systems, not according to the Ascendancy's own doctrine, and doctrine mattered to the Serrak because doctrine was the architecture of reality. It told them what could happen, what could not happen, and what would be done to anything that attempted to exist between the two. Yet the recovery signal continued to pulse from ahead of the fleet, soft and patient and humiliatingly familiar, repeating the same 3 words from a scout vessel that had vanished before any distress beacon should have had time to deploy. Path is clear. Supreme Marshal Ver Karan did not move for a long moment. Around him, the flagship's command terrace waited with disciplined stillness, but that stillness had begun to change shape. Earlier, it had been confidence. Now it was compression. Every officer stood inside the pressure of a question no one wanted to ask aloud. If the signal was genuine, then one of the missing scouts had somehow crossed deeper into the Harrow Line and survived. If it was false, then something inside human infrastructure had learned enough about Serrak command language to speak with the voice of their own fleet. Both possibilities were unacceptable. Trace the source, Karan ordered. The flagship obeyed. The entire invasion formation obeyed with it. Sensor arrays opened like predatory flowers, pouring attention toward the distant signal. 900 war vessels adjusted scanning angles within a single synchronized pulse. It was beautiful in the way Serrak warfare was always beautiful from a distance, clean, unified, mathematically violent. It was also exactly what the Harrow Line had been waiting for. Across the corridor, abandoned human sites began reflecting the scan. Not loudly, not as a counterattack. They answered like mirrors buried under dust, each one returning a fraction of the Serrak signal with a delay too small for instinct and too precise for accident. The fleet's own attention came back layered, bent, and multiplied. Navigation systems corrected for the reflections. Threat systems corrected for the corrections. Formation guidance adjusted to preserve clean lines between ships. Every system made the most rational decision available, and every rational decision carried the fleet one step deeper into a lie it had helped build. In the Galactic Tribunal, Relin SAE watched the display turn from tactical projection into something closer to a living maze. Lines of possible movement flickered and collapsed. Safe vectors appeared for seconds, then narrowed. Dead moons became reference points. Wreckage fields became warnings. Rescue beacons became legal obstacles. The Serrak were not being dragged through the Harrow Line. They were being persuaded by their own instruments. That is not a defense grid, one delegate whispered. Mara Ellison heard him and did not turn.
No, she said.
A grid can be broken. The chair's inner lights flared sharply beneath translucent skin. Then what is it? Mara kept her eyes on the trapped fleet. A conversation with an empire that only listens to force. The answer spread unease through the chamber because it sounded almost philosophical until the next Serrak cruiser vanished from formation. It did not explode either. That was what made the losses worse. An explosion had grammar. It could be answered with damage reports, retaliation plans, and casualty projections. This was absence. The cruiser moved between two overlapping sensor shadows. Its beacon flickered once, and then it appeared 30,000 kilometers from its assigned position with its engines disabled and its command system locked in emergency preservation mode. Its crew was alive. Its weapons were cold. Its navigation core was repeating a human civilian safety protocol older than half the tribunal members. Do not proceed through unstable terrain. Await recovery. For the first time in living galactic memory, a Serrak warship had been placed in timeout. The laughter began somewhere in the upper benches, quickly strangled into silence, but not before the sound reached the tribunal feed. Karan heard it 4 seconds later on the flagship. His jaw tightened, and that tiny motion did more damage than any human missile could have done in that moment, because every officer on his Terra saw it. Serrak commanders did not display anger at inferior species. Anger acknowledged interference. Anger admitted that the opponent had entered the mind. Destroy the next active site, Karan said. A weapons officer selected a fractured moon whose gravitational pulses had shaped the fleet's inner ring for the last 6 minutes. The target had no population, no atmosphere, no heat signature, and no active military classification. It was dead rock by treaty definition. The flagship fired. The beam struck the moon's northern hemisphere and carved a white wound through ancient stone. For half a second, the tribunals saw raw power, the kind of force that had ended civilizations before they could finish prayers. Then the moon came apart in layers that were too clean to be natural. Its outer crust split into thousands of plated fragments, each one coated on the interior with reflective latticework that caught Serrak targeting light and scattered it across the corridor. The dead moon had not been hiding a weapon. It had been hiding a lens. The Harrow Line bloomed. Every Serrak screen filled with targets. Not false ships exactly, but possibilities wearing the shape of danger. Reflections of reflections moved between vessels. Phantom engine flares crossed firing lanes. Friendly ships appeared half a degree out of position. The centralized command mind tried to resolve the contradictions, but unity became weakness when no two parts of the fleet were seeing the same battlefield. One destroyer rotated to cover an opening that did not exist. Another corrected away from a collision that was not coming. A carrier locked its weapons for 3 seconds on the silhouette of its own escort before the system recognized the mistake and shut the guns down. 3 seconds was enough. Not for humanity to fire, because humanity still had not fired a single visible shot. 3 seconds was enough for the entire galaxy to understand. The Serrak were not losing to human weapons. They were losing to human preparation. In the tribunal, the legal accusations began immediately because fear often disguised itself as procedure. Several delegates demanded to know whether Earth had violated the armament restrictions placed on frontier infrastructure. Others insisted the moons constituted hidden military assets. A few, especially those whose worlds had once surrendered to the Serrak, said nothing at all. They were crying quietly, not from sadness, but from the terrible relief of seeing the unbeatable finally misread something. Mara waited until the chamber had exhausted its first wave of outrage. Then she lifted her wrist slate and sent a file to the central record. 71 years ago, she said, Earth submitted the Harrow Region Civilian Continuity Plan for Coalition Archival Review. 52 years ago, we added disaster navigation redundancy. 39 years ago, we added deep space rescue stabilizers. 26 years ago, after the Serrak annexed Valen Reach and executed its evacuation authorities, we requested permission to harden all abandoned human industrial zones against hostile transit emergencies. Permission was granted. The chamber fell into a silence that had edges. The tribunal chair read the file summary, and with every line, the old arrogance of the room became heavier. Humanity had not hidden the Harrow Line. Not really. It had named each piece something boring enough to be ignored. It had described every function in civilian language. It had explained that the system could preserve evacuation lanes, prevent fleet collisions, create emergency rerouting, and record hostile movement through abandoned human space. The committees had approved it because they had imagined refugees, not invaders. They had imagined accidents, not empires. No one had imagined humans could design mercy and deterrence with the same tools. Karan did not have the tribunal file yet, but he understood enough. The Harrow Line was not a battlefield trap in the simple sense. A battlefield trap ended movement. This one-shaped behavior. It waited for aggression, then converted aggression into evidence, overreaction into confinement, certainty into error. His fleet was still powerful enough to burn worlds, but power required a clean decision, and the humans had poisoned decision itself. Full dispersal, he ordered. The terrace froze. No Serrak invasion fleet had executed full dispersal in hostile space for over 4 centuries. It was a maneuver of shame, used only when formation integrity could no longer be trusted. To speak it aloud was to admit that unity had failed. Still, the officers obeyed, because obedience was the last wall standing between Serrak identity and terror. The fleet began to spread. That was the second mistake. The moment the ships moved away from one another, the Harrow Line stopped behaving like a corridor and became a net. Emergency buoys activated behind separated vessels. Gravitational stabilizers created narrow pockets of safe motion around individual ships, each pocket leading slightly forward. Retreat routes filled with technically accurate warnings. Crossfire zones appeared where none had been a moment before. The more the Serrak dispersed, the more isolated each ship became inside its own private version of the battlefield. Then the hidden purpose revealed itself. Every Serrak vessel received a different message. Not from Earth Command. Not from Mara. Not from any visible human source. From the Harrow Line itself. Each message contained a route to survival. Each route was legal under emergency navigation law. Each route avoided collision, radiation hazards, debris storms, and friendly fire. Each route led forward into the same uncharted system at the far end of the corridor. Refusal remained possible. The humans had left choice intact with almost cruel precision. But every alternative now carried escalating risk, and Serrak doctrine demanded preservation of fleet assets until conquest could resume. Karan stared as the routes converged on his display. Only then did he understand the insult at the heart of the human design. The Harrow Line did not force the Serrak to continue. It made continuing look like their own best idea. In the tribunal chamber, Mara's slate received a private confirmation from Earth's outer watch. She read it once, closed her hand around the device, and looked up at the projection where the greatest invasion fleet in known space had begun following human directions while still believing itself unconquered. The chair spoke softly now, with none of the authority from before. Ambassador Ellison, where are they being led? Mara did not answer immediately. On the broadcast, the Serrak fleet crossed the final threshold of the Harrow Line, wounded, separated, furious, and still dangerous enough to kill millions if the next move failed. Ahead of them, the uncharted system waited without lights, without defense signatures, without any sign of Earth's promised fleet. Only one thing appeared on every Serrak navigation screen as they entered. A human court summons translated perfectly into Serrak command language.
The Harrow Line has trapped the Serrak without a single visible human shot. Their own discipline, censors, and laws are turning against them. But Earth has not led them to a battlefield. It has led them to judgment.
For the first time since the invasion began, Supreme Marshal Ver Karan did not issue an order. The summons hung across every Serrak command display in perfect military grammar, addressed not to the Ascendancy, not to its throne, not even to the fleet, but to him personally. It identified his command authority, listed his operational chain, cited the invasion proclamation he had broadcast in his own voice, and requested his presence before a human jurisdictional review for attempted annexation, unlawful transit through protected civilian infrastructure, and intent to conduct planetary occupation against a recognized sentient species. It was absurd. That was what Karan told himself first, because absurdity was easier to bear than fear. A court summons did not stop warships. A legal notice did not disable weapons. Humans, newly risen and still soft with diplomatic hope, had somehow mistaken procedure for power. They had dragged the Serrak through their dead corridor, humiliated their navigation systems, separated their fleet, and then, at the edge of victory, revealed themselves as bureaucrats. Then the uncharted system powered on. It did not happen all at once. There was no dramatic burst of light, no fleet decloaking in a glorious wall, no weapons grid flaring with heroic fire. Instead, old stations began waking in sequence across the dark like witnesses raising their heads. A broken ring habitat lit one section at a time. A cluster of maintenance yards unfolded observation spines from hulls that had looked abandoned for generations. Dead satellites rotated toward the fleet, not with guns, but with lenses. Listening arrays came alive around a cold blue dwarf star, and their signals braided together until every Serrak transmission, every internal order, every targeting solution, and every historical command packet from the invasion route was captured, translated, authenticated, and broadcast outward. Across the galaxy, the tribunal feed expanded beyond the chamber. Worlds that had once paid tribute to the Serrak saw the fleet's occupation protocols for the first time. Client species saw private orders describing their people as replaceable labor reserves. Neutral powers saw civilian casualty models marked acceptable. Even allied governments that had tolerated the ascendancy because it brought order were forced to watch the machinery beneath that order turn in public. Quran understood then that the system was not a battlefield. It was a courtroom large enough for the galaxy. In the tribunal chamber, no one spoke. The delegates who had demanded Earth explain itself now watched Serrak doctrine unfold line by line across the central projection, each document verified by the fleet's own encrypted signatures. Mara Ellison stood alone beneath the judgment lights, but she no longer looked isolated. She looked like the only person in the room who had known where the floor truly was. The tribunal chair turned toward her, voice almost unsteady. "You built this system for prosecution." Mara's expression did not change. "We built it for truth." On the Serrak flagship, Quran recovered faster than most beings would have. He had not become supreme marshal by being fragile. Shame could be survived. Exposure could be answered. If the humans wanted spectacle, he would give them one written in plasma and broken metal. He ordered the forward batteries to arm and selected the largest active station as the first target. The weapons did not fire. Not because they were disabled. Not because Earth had hacked the fleet. The firing solution failed because the Harrow Line had carried the Serrak into a legally protected evacuation system filled with registered civilian recovery structures, tribunal observation equipment, and live interstellar witnesses. Available shot passed through layers of protected infrastructure now broadcasting under emergency law. The ship's own compliance architecture, built into Serrak vessels after centuries of treaty manipulation, flagged the attack as a prosecutable first strike under 1,000 agreements the Ascendancy had once forced weaker species to sign. The old Serrak laws had become chains. "Override," Quran said. The command terrace went still. An override was possible. It had always been possible. Serrak commanders could burn through legal locks when conquest demanded it, but the act required formal voice authorization, command acknowledgement, and recorded intent. In secret, it was a tool. In front of the galaxy, it was confession. "Override," Quran repeated. His weapons officer's hands hovered over the control surface and did not move. The hesitation was small, but this time it did not disappear quickly. It spread from one officer to another with the terrible speed of thought becoming personal. The Serrak had been trained to obey certainty, but certainty had led them into a human courtroom. Certainty had scattered their formation. Certainty had transformed their private doctrine into public evidence. For the first time, obedience did not feel like strength. It felt like stepping willingly into a trap that had already explained itself. A new transmission entered the system. Not from the tribunal. From the human home command. It was a single visual feed, plain and unadorned, showing Admiral Lena cross-seated at a narrow table with no banners behind her and no theatrical symbols of power. Her hair was silver, her uniform dark, and her voice carried the calm of someone who had spent her life preparing for a moment she hoped would never arrive. "Supreme Marshal Quran," she said, "your fleet has been offered lawful exit twice. You ignored the first offer when you entered the Harrow Line. You ignored the second when you accepted emergency routing into this system. This is the third and final offer. Power down weapons, preserve your crews, and submit to tribunal custody." Charon stared at the human woman as if hatred alone might restore the old shape of the universe. "And if we refuse?" he asked. Admiral Cross looked almost sad. "Then every species watching will know we tried peace first." The system changed again. This time, the fleet did arrive. Human ships emerged from behind the cold star and from the shadow of dark maintenance frames, not in the impossible numbers the Serrak had imagined, but in disciplined lines that made no attempt to appear larger than they were. They were not beautiful. They were not ceremonial. They were practical, layered, ugly in places, built with the same philosophy as the Harrow Line itself. Nothing wasted. Nothing placed for pride. Everything present for a reason. They did not look like conquerors. They looked like an answer. Charon's tactical officers calculated the engagement in seconds, and the result should have comforted him. The Serrak still had more ships. The Serrak still carried heavier weapons. In a clean battle, they could inflict catastrophic damage. But there would be no clean battle. Their formation was broken. Their command trust was fractured. Their legal locks were live. Their allies were watching. Their enemies were watching. Their own client worlds were watching. Every shot would strengthen the case against them, and every refusal to shoot would weaken the myth that had carried the Ascendancy across centuries. Then the first Serrak client fleet cut its beacon from the invasion network. It was a small thing on the display, only a minor auxiliary wing from a conquered border species that the Ascendancy did not consider important enough to fear. But after that beacon went dark, another followed. Then a supply flotilla. Then 3 escort groups. Then an entire Protectorate squadron reversed its formation lights and transmitted a neutral status to the tribunal. The Ascendancy did not collapse from the outside. It began coming apart from the people who had been waiting to see it bleed. Charon watched the defections spread, and in that moment, the final cruelty of the human design revealed itself. Humanity had not built a trap to destroy his fleet. It had built a stage where everyone oppressed by the Serrak could safely witness the first crack. The Harrow Line had not merely guided ships. It had guided history toward a place where fear could change sides. On the tribunal floor, Mara heard the first surrender code from a Serrak escort vessel and closed her eyes for half a breath. Not in triumph. In grief, perhaps, or relief, or the exhaustion that comes when a species survives something it should never have had to survive. When she opened them, her voice was steady. "Record that vessel as protected under Earth guarantee." The words moved through the tribunal like a physical force. Earth guarantee. A phrase that had meant very little that morning now settled across the chamber with the weight of a new law being born. Charon stood surrounded by officers who would no longer meet his eyes. His fleet was not yet destroyed, but its future had been taken. Its violence had been seen. Its certainty had been broken. Its conquered servants had learned that refusal could begin with one darkened beacon. At last, the Supreme Marshal lowered his hand from the command rail. "Power down forward weapons," he said. No one celebrated immediately. Not in the human fleet. Not in the tribunal. Not even on the worlds that had dreamed of this moment in secret. Some victories were too large to enter all at once. They had to be understood slowly, like sunrise after a very long night. Only after the final Serrak battery went cold did Admiral Cross speak again. "Supreme Marshal Charon, your surrender is acknowledged." The tribunal chamber remained silent until the chair turned toward Earth's ambassador with something that was not fear anymore, though it had fear inside it. Respect, perhaps? Or the beginning of caution. "Ambassador Ellison," the chair said, "how many more systems like this has humanity prepared?" Mara sent a document to the central display. 612 civilian continuity projects appeared in the public record, each filed legally, each approved without attention, each carrying names so harmless they could have slept forever inside an archive. The delegates stared at the list. Rel Lindsay, still standing at his analyst station, counted twice before his throat tightened. He checked the registry, then the old filings, then the live map. 611 projects had coordinates. One did not. Mara saw him notice. For the first time that day, the corner of her mouth lifted. Far beyond the tribunal, beyond the Harrow Line, beyond the system where the Serrak fleet sat defeated beneath the eyes of the galaxy, Something human remained unlisted, unlit, and unfinished in the dark.
Humanity won through patience, intelligence, and preparation. The Serrak trusted fear and force, but Earth used truth, law, and strategy. And even after victory, one human project remains hidden, proof that humanity is always building ahead.